Hello everybody and welcome back to Red Eagle Politics. Make sure you like this video down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. So as we know, the red wave is building up and it is continuing to build up every single day that goes by. The Republicans are now up in RCP by 3.3%, with a lot of the undecided voters breaking Republican, and that is with a dump of registered voter polls, probably doing even a little bit better if those polls screen for likely voters. We see Democrat incumbents in every single swing Senate race failing to get above 48%, while Republican candidates have been surging over the past month in every race in terms of the polling. Also, a lot of Democrats have talked about for months Dobbs v. Jackson being a very pressing issue for the midterms. Yet again, in every single poll that we've seen, pretty much abortion is not even a top 5 issue among independent voters. The voters who are going to be voting Democrat because of abortion, probably going to be voting Democrat anyway, and that's been, shown in the polls for months now. Also, you look at the fact that the Republicans are doing extremely well in early voting in Florida, among several other states as well. You just cannot look at this election and you cannot say that a red wave is not brewing, which brings us to ground zero for retaking the Senate, which is the state of Pennsylvania. And there have been polls released months on end that show John Fetterman in the lead. Dr. Oz has not led or tied in a single poll until today. Right now, you look at the fact that Dr. Oz is in a dead heat with John Fetterman for the Senate race in Pennsylvania, according to Insider Advantage. Fairly accurate poll in the state of Pennsylvania compared to a lot of other mainstream media pollsters. And it also shows that Doug Mastriano has a chance in the governor's race, and it shows an 8-point shift towards Mastriano from the last poll that they conducted, which is very interesting. This poll does screen for likely voters in the state of Pennsylvania. And this is a recurring theme, by the way. This is a recurring theme that shows Republicans doing better in every single, Senate race that's competitive leading up to the election, especially compared to the previous polls. We remember when John Fetterman led the aggregate. I talked about this a little bit in my last video. He led the RCP aggregate by 9 percentage points just a few months ago. That has been evaporated completely. The RCP average right now has him up by just 2 percentage points. That's well within the margin of error. Apply the traditional historical polling error in the state of Pennsylvania. What do we exactly see? We see Oz potentially being in the lead. People will say, well, he hasn't led a poll. He hasn't even tied in a poll. Well, that's changed now. I'm sure he will lead in a poll over the next couple of weeks or so, given the way that the trajectory of the race is going. But beyond that point, North Carolina in 2014 and 2020 for the Senate races, Democrats led pretty much every single poll. So it's not like that really matters. Maine, I don't even think Susan Collins led a single poll. She was down in the polls by close to 10. She ended up winning by close to 10. Very interesting how that works out there. But Republicans in the state of Pennsylvania are poised for a decent showing. They are. And this is very true. Finally, we see Oz leading or tied in a poll. Finally, it's been a long time, but that's beside the point. This is a common theme, and I said this before, and I'll say it again. Insider Advantage shows Fetterman in a tie with Oz. Fabrizio shows this race narrowing by 5 points. Fox shows it narrowing by 7. Emerson shows it narrowing by 2. On average, that's a 4.2% shift to Oz. He's on track to win. And the early vote backs this up in the state of Pennsylvania, especially. And you don't want to compare it to 2018 early vote. People will say, well, you have to because it's a midterm year. But election laws were vastly changed before 2020. Everybody knows that. If you're going to be comparing this midterm year to 2018 in terms of the early vote, saying, well, Republicans aren't voting early as much, you are brain dead. You don't know how things work. It's very evident. I've seen so many people do this. It's wrong. We know that there was a massive shift in terms of who voted early in 2020 because Donald Trump attacked mail-in voting. And this is true. And more Republicans began to vote in person. More Democrats decided to vote via absentee. But still, we know that Republicans, even after 2020, we've seen, a wider split in some races. We've expected wider splits between Democrats and Republicans in terms of the early vote, even compared to 2020 because of COVID. That's out of the way pretty much. And Republicans are doing better in the mail-in vote in Pennsylvania in 2022 than they were in 2020, which is absolutely huge. And it shows. And it shows that more Republicans are just energized to vote because they're angry at what's happening. They're angry with this administration. They know that John Fetterman is going to be a stooge for this administration. This is true. John Fetterman is an utter train wreck. The people that said that this guy was an electoral juggernaut or that Oz had no chance against him for months, they are being proven wrong in real time. Just watch the guy speak. Forget the policy. We could talk about the policy all we want. We could talk about the fact, yes, he would vote for Biden 100% of the time. He would be farther left than Biden. He was anti-fracking for a majority of his career until he magically won the Democrat nomination this year. We could talk about the fact that he's advocated for releasing a third of all prisoners. We could advocate for the fact that he's literally high 95% of the time. We could talk about the fact that he's had weird behavior on Twitter. We could talk about all of this and more. His economic proposals, that he would basically be Bernie Sanders, but from Pennsylvania. That's irrelevant here. Because just look at the sheer optics of this guy. Watch him speak. I'll play a few clips. I've played some of them on this channel before. I'm going to play some right here, right now. Take a listen.
And the Eagles are so much better than the Eagles.
Can we now running for the Senate and you own 10 homes and you are not unwilling to raise a minimum wage above $7.25 an hour?
Please understand the stakes in this race. Send me to Washington, D.C. so I can work with Senator Casey and I can champion the union way of life in D.C.
I mean, we all know that Dr. Oz does live in New Jersey, but the simple is important too, to recognize how can you understand a life of a Pennsylvania resident if you have nothing to be able to serve one that has no clue on what life is like.
Thank you very much, and it's an honor. I live 8 minutes away from here, and when I leave tonight, I got 3 miles away, Dr. Oz in his mansion in New Jersey. You've got a friend and you have an ally. Send me to Washington, D.C. Thank you very much.
This guy makes Biden, I've said it before, I'll say it again, look like a Mensa recipient by comparison. This guy is an utter train wreck, an optics disaster. You know, staying in the basement can only help you for so long. He's out there on the campaign trail. People could say, well, it's because of the stroke, whatever. Even if you want to take that angle, which it's a very disingenuous angle to take, because he was not a good public speaker before then, and he's not now. But if you want to say that that's going to prevent him from being mentally coherent, then why exactly do you believe that the independent voters of Pennsylvania are going to vote to send this guy to the United States Senate? That's a question that these people cannot answer. They're clowns. They will say, oh, the polls are magically fixed this time. They're not magically fixed. The polls were awful in the 2022 primaries in Pennsylvania, and they missed Western Pennsylvania, the rural part, the very pro-Trump part explicitly. And Dr. Oz and McCormick both did better there than anticipated. But you look at the fact that McCormick, in some polls, he was down significantly. You look at the fact that he was only getting 19.6%. He almost won. It was a pure toss-up. People were thinking that Barnett was going to be the one to upset Oz. No, McCormick came out of nowhere on election night and almost toppled Oz because his campaign spent a lot of energy grifting in Western Pennsylvania, despite the fact that McCormick had far more red flags in his past regarding his politics than Dr. Oz did. And Oz is still controversial. He's going to win because Fetterman is awful, but he's still somebody a lot of people don't trust. But the base is coming on board. I mean, they are. You look at the recent polling. You can't look at that and ignore that fact. I mean, the people that are saying that the polls are magically going to be fixed in Pennsylvania and that it's all perfect now are the same smug, arrogant people that are going to be eating their crow over the next 2 years until they eat their crow again because they have a humiliation fetish. There's no other explanation. Yes, I'm looking at you, Nate Plastic, and the election mafia and all of its supporters. But you also want to talk about the governor's race because that's also important as well. And a lot of people are saying Mastriano has no chance. And it is true that he has been left out to dry by the RGA. It is a disgrace. And he really hasn't raised a whole lot of money for his governorship run. We understand this. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's over for him. You could say it's not looking good regarding a lot of the polling. But if Western Pennsylvania is being missed significantly to this degree that it was in terms of both the Senate race and the governor's race, that it was in the primaries, it's possible. Mastriano outperformed the polls in the primary by roughly 10 percentage points or so. You could say, well, the undecided just went to him. But at the end of the day, he got 100% of the undecideds. That's really a statistical anomaly. That's not exactly how these things work. There was a polling miss, absolutely, just as there was a polling miss in the Senate race. But beyond that, and by the way, Western Pennsylvania is where Mastriano performed the best in the primary as well. It's also where McCormick performed the best. But it's just important to look back and acknowledge that if you were to apply this to the general election, let's say the polls at the end of the day actually have the Senate race as a tie. Let's say the polls at the end of the day have Shapiro winning by 7. Shapiro, by the way, who vastly underperformed the polls in the 2020 election in his AG's race. But let's assume both of those things to be true. Oz very well could win this election by 7 points or so, and he could take Mastriano with him. Mastriano is not dead on arrival. If he had money, he probably would be the favorite right now, but he's not. But it really just depends on Oz's margin of victory, if Oz is able to carry Mastriano, and it also depends on the fact of polls and are they actually getting the voters. Because if the early vote is telling us that Republicans are outperforming 2020, and we also look at the fact that the polls have a massive miss in a certain region that is pivotal to both Oz and Mastriano, and we couple that with the fact that Republicans are supercharged and they're energized and the national environment is moving right and it's R+3, potentially could be R+5, R+6 at the end of the day. Yes, Pennsylvania could see Mastriano and Oz both win, but it just depends. It depends on where the polls are really grasping, because if the polls are oversampling college-educated white voters in suburban Philadelphia, and Oz is running even, and they're missing the rural voters who will vote for both Oz and Mastriano, even if they're voting for Oz a little bit more reluctantly, then we could be in for a massive red wave in Pennsylvania. You're talking about all the toss-up congressional races going Republican as well, which would be huge, absolutely huge to happen. But still, we still have about 2 to 3 weeks between now and Election Day, and Republicans have the energy factor. They have the enthusiasm advantage, definitely. The polls are looking better for them every single day, and Oz has not even debated Fetterman. It's apparent right now that Dr. Oz is the favorite. We'll just see what happens in terms of the governor's race. But either way, a big, big development with Oz getting tied in the poll. And it's possible we're going to see him leading some polls in these coming weeks. And in my opinion, he is the favorite as of now. So anyways, guys, thanks for watching this video. Like this video down below, comment down below, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications so you never miss another video. Follow me on social media. The links are all in the description down below. As always, guys, thanks for watching. Red Eagle, out.